Welcome, everybody, to the live Cybersecurity Awareness Forum. I'm Scott Wright, the CEO of ClickArmor, and I'll tell you a little bit more about myself when we introduce the panelists. But for those of you who are regulars, or maybe we call them forumers, you'll see some familiar faces in Fleetus and Tyler. They'll do an intro in a minute, but Ryan is off on vacation this week, not able to join us, but we hope to have him back on the next session. So I'll start by doing a really quick overview of what the live Cybersecurity Awareness Forum is and how it works. But first, before we do that, I'd love to get everybody to type in the chat where you're joining us from geographically. We'd love to see good international representation. And also, I think we just learned that Michelle, who often joins us from the UK, is not able to, but hopefully she may be able to join us sometime during the session. But we do also like to have a diverse panel, and I would love to just ask first of all, if we have any instructional designers on the call today, or if we have anyone who has role-based security training in place now within their organization that can help us understand, what is good or bad, or things that you're observing about it. So if you're either an instructional designer or a role-based in an organization with role-based training, security training, let us know in the chat, and we will. Okay, so Michael says yes and yes. That is great. So Michael, could you let us know if you'd be okay with us adding you to the panel today, so you can sort of chime in on each of the questions that we have? Michael, just got to find you here. Here we are. There we go. So you should get a prompt to join us. Excellent. So, also Matthew.
Got it.
Okay, let me see if I can find Matthew.
Yep. Like the fox. Like the fox.
There we go. All right. So now we have everybody in place. Welcome. And what we will do, as you might not have known, we actually record this session and publish it on YouTube. In fact, today is our first attempt to live stream to YouTube. So we'll see how that goes, but it typically provides a recording as we do the session. I'll go in and chop off some of the parts that are not that valuable, so it'll still be there later on. But we do record every session. It's on our YouTube channel, the ClickArmor YouTube channel. And we also take a transcript of it, and we create a blog post that is sort of condensed with some insights from the session that you can find on our website. And then every quarter we take all those insights and put them into a report. And so we issued one for Q1. We're actually just finishing up the draft for the Q2 report, and really looking forward to seeing that and the results from our last 6 sessions in Q2. So that's just to give you an idea of how we use this information and these recordings. The agenda that we usually follow, if you're not familiar with it, is we like to start out asking some poll questions of the attendees, and then we'll do panelist introductions. We'll get the panelists to comment on the poll questions, as well as some of our open-ended questions that we add just to drive the discussion. It's really very powerful to hear everybody's different perspectives. And I'll reflect on the insights for executives, for implementers, and for individuals. We'll try to do that and call them out as we are talking about them at any time during the session, so that when we do transcripts, we can do searches and find those insights for executives, implementers, and individuals. And we'll try and wrap up with those insights as well, just to make sure everybody gets full value out of this. And at the end, we'll be announcing our next session date, as well as some other promotional things that might be of interest to you. So with that, let's get started. We're going to launch a poll that asks just a few sort of closed-ended questions of the audience. Panelists won't be able to answer, but you will be able to see the questions, and you'll be able to comment with us on what the responses were shortly. So the first question you'll see is, have you received any role-based security training currently or in the past? And then another question, there we go. What format do you prefer to see training delivered in? And which security training topics do you think are important? So sorry, Name had a question, had her hand up. think, and just wondering if you want to enter that in the chat. All right, so I'm going to launch the poll. Here we are. So you guys should see the poll now. So the questions are, have you received any role-based security training in your current or past positions? Yes or no? At what size of organization do you think, I actually didn't get this updated in time. We're actually asking a different question in the automated poll, but I will ask the other one just live, and we can talk about that. What size of organization do you think generally putting role-based security training in place is valuable? So is it for any size? Is it for over 10, 25, 50, 100, 500 people if size is a criteria? Or if you have a better criteria, then feel free to enter that in the chat. And lastly, which security training topics do you think are important to cover in role-based security training? So things like access control, data encryption, secure coding, network security and monitoring, or threats targeting your role. So we're going to let a few more people have more time to answer. And while we're doing that, I'm going to ask the panelists to do a real quick intro for themselves in case people haven't seen you before. So I'll start with Fleetus, and then we'll move on to Michael and Tyler. And I don't know if Matt joined us or not, but we'll see. Okay, go ahead, Fleetus.
So, excuse me, Fleetus Poston, security champion / evangelist. Currently serve as a security operations manager for a backup and recovery solution. So I like to bring the security operations point of view to the security awareness discussions we have here. So nice to meet everyone.
Excellent. Michael, are you able to come off mute and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Mike Redman. I am the lead master instructor for Showman, and been doing cybersecurity between being in uniform with the United States Marine Corps to being a government civilian with the Space and Army Defense Command and the Army Strategic Command, and then as a full-time consultant over the last decade or so.
Excellent. Great. And so, yeah, we look forward to your insights, Michael. Tyler?
Hi, everybody. My name is Tyler Sweeney. I'm a cybersecurity specialist and account manager at a MSP here in California called Global CTI. Excited to be back and join the webinar. Was busy the last couple ones, so I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, and it's awesome to have you back, Tyler. We'll look forward to your insights as well.
Thanks.
So just going to, I thought we might have Matthew. Something happened. I thought I had promoted, and I see he's on. He says he's on, but I don't see him on my grid.
He's online, Scott. He's
there.
online.
He is. There he is.
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
Hello. So I have been a multi-time chief information security officer. I've been in a range of different organizations. I've implemented role-based security in more than one organization. So happy to help everybody out here. I mean, this has been around for more than 25 years, and security awareness training is important.
That's awesome. Thanks very much for joining us, all of you. So I guess at this point, we have 11 or 12 people who, 16 in some cases, have put their answers into the questions. So why don't we start? I'm going to just go back to that one question that wasn't actually in the automated poll, but let's talk about it for a second. That is, what format do you prefer to see training delivered in? So when it comes to security training, what do you guys think is most effective? Is it self-paced, instructor-led, video recorded, or other kinds of stuff? Fleetus?
Sure. So it depends on the type of training. So like going to your last question here, if it's compliance-based training where the material has to be the same and needs to be repeated, a computer-based, self-paced, or a pre-recorded call is generally best, because that way you can check a box, it's compliant. You know that the material has been presented the same way to the same demeanor across your entire organization. If it's targeted, it's more than likely going to be instructor-led, either live online for the virtual companies or in a conference room or a town hall setting.
Excellent. Okay, Tyler?
Yeah, I know we've talked about this before. I think you're right on the money as far as compliance training goes, because that, I mean, as important as that is, you do need to check that box. I know we talked about this in the past, as far as like instructor-led or live sessions. I do think those have like a sort of a unique ability to sort of meet people where they're at, especially if you get that to where your staff is comfortable asking questions. Because I think that's kind of where we see some of the deficit with self-paced stuff, or, especially with recorded sessions. Because to me, the biggest aha moments are when someone, can sometimes maybe even ask what, to us might be common sense or a basic level question, but we all have to be aware that, we're meeting people where they're at. But yeah, I think it, it obviously, I don't want to give the "it depends" answer, but it does depend on what we're going over.
That's okay. If you want to say it depends, then just, make some assumptions and throw it out there, what works best. So, Michael, go ahead.
So, I mean, I'll pretty much agree with the other panelists that, if it's just your average annual cybersecurity awareness training or security awareness training, doing pre-recorded sessions or self-paced on demand always works. That way you can kind of gauge full participation and make sure that, everyone across the organization has participated, on their annual renewal date. However, with more, I guess, complicated subjects, for instance, targeting, networkers, targeting, different personnel groups like accounting and HR. I've always found instructor-led training is the best because it gives them an opportunity to ask their role-based questions of the instructor to get a better and more full answer to something that you can't really anticipate ahead of time doing any type of pre-recorded or self-paced engagement.
Awesome. Yeah, I think one of the things you mentioned there is, instructor led. I think it's really helpful to be able to do that. As you say, it's easy to adapt to the responses you're getting from people in the audience. So that helps a lot too. But as I think Stephen pointed out, it's a little hard to scale sometimes when it's live. So we have to try and make some accommodations, I think, and some good judgment. It's not going to be easy to do all the time. Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with most of my panelists here. I've found, though, in situations where I've had to do it live, especially if you're dealing with a small group of 20 or less, you sometimes get some really good insights from a cybersecurity perspective, what's going on, and you find some really surprising things that you didn't think was actually happening, but people are doing, especially if you get a more vocal group.
Yeah.
So I find that there is value sitting down, having some FaceTime, getting to know some people, and it kind of depends on the group and the context. I agree. If you're dealing with compliance, I've actually done compliance and then added in a role. Okay, here's what you have to do for the salespeople, which is different than what you have to do for the finance team, which is different than, say, the sales floor. But I think getting that business alignment is very important. If the business finds it extremely important to have, hey, we can't do a full security awareness training because it takes up too much time of our staff's time. Why don't we do it in 2 half-hour breaks? I've done things like that before in the past. That makes perfect sense to me. You have to meet the needs of the business when doing this security awareness training. So whenever I approach it, I am very open-minded, but along with the business, if I say, hey, I'm gonna need a staff of 5 to do that, I can go have a discussion with the business and then they can change or adjust their expectations appropriately. So.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that those are really great insights. We also had a comment from Brandy who wants to chime in. So Brandy, can you hear us? Are you able to unmute?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'm coming from the university. So this is what I'm going to say about role-based security. I believe that labs, games, anything interactive, capture the flag challenges, reward motivated, those get people engaged. It makes it hard for them to forget what you're talking about. We can't put blocks of text in front of people. That won't work. That's like giving policies. Nobody wants to read that. Whatever we do has to be engaging. It has to make people say, blue teaming, anything where we have to put our hands on something, whether it's the keyboard, whether it's to put on our headphones, those are effective. And those can be automated, they can be scaled because you can create them beforehand. You can create lab situations, you can create capture the flag challenges and stuff like that. So yeah, those are really important and they need to be embraced. So that's it.
That's awesome. Yeah. Fantastic. I don't think anybody would disagree on that. And I think the trick is sometimes how do you do that? So I'm going to make a little plug that I'll tell you about later on that Click Armor can help you do that. So I will now close the poll and share the results with people. So this is going to be fun. It's always interesting to hear the panel's discussion on what the responses were. So for question number 1, we had, have you received role-based security training in your current or past positions? Yes, 10 out of 23 people, so 43%. No, 13 out of 23, 57%. So a little bit on the minority of people who actually have had role-based security training. So love to chat a little bit more with people who have had it, as we've got Michael and Matthew on the panel too now. So at what size of organization do you think generally putting security role-based security training in place is valuable? So 14 out of 23, 60% said size doesn't matter. Well, that's interesting. Okay, so 1 said over 25, 2 said over 50, 3 said over 100, and 3 said over 500. And if people have ideas they can put in the chat for other criteria for how you decide how do you decide when to do role-based security training? Love to hear your comments in the chat. So let's go back to the panel. I'm going to go the reverse order this time so that you haven't had your thunder stolen. So Matthew, do you want to make any comments on what we've seen at this point in the poll results?
It's not totally surprising, the results there. I've seen cases where you get a small group of people for compliance reasons, you need to have that separation. But sometimes what I've done in the past when creating these security trainings is I've broken it down for everybody and just put all the training for all the different groups if you're dealing with a small company. So I guess I've worked with things on multiple fronts, and I'm very flexible and go along with what the business needs.
Excellent. Okay. Michael, how about your thoughts?
You're on mute, Michael.
Sorry, I was digesting the poll results actually. Yeah, this day and age, it does surprise me that there were so many people that said no. Because there are many frameworks, and I guess it depends on the type of industry that you're in and your company, but there all the frameworks that I work with, right, everywhere from SOC and ISO to the most recent standards of the risk management framework and CMMC require role-based training. So the fact that we still have people out there that aren't getting it is a little shocking, a little disturbing. But that just lets me know as a cyber professional that no matter how far we come, we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, it is a little bit surprising, but I guess it might reflect the fact that maybe a higher percentage of people on the call today aren't necessarily subject to some of those compliance regimes, and where they don't necessarily have to follow. And I have an example slide to show people kind of what I think you're referring to, Michael, that will give people an idea what's expected in those kinds of compliance programs. So really good thoughts. Tyler.
Yeah, I was gonna you got some good points by Michael and Matthew. I was a little bit surprised with how few people hadn't received role-based training. But then to look at that with in regards to the second question we have actually on the poll here, in terms of what size do people think we should have role-based security training. I kind of based on I kind of see it both ways, right? In a perfect world we would have every role, properly addressed, meeting people where they're at. But then, like with, companies with 10, 25 people, the way that Matthew talked about, okay, we have this presentation, if it's a smaller company, and breaking it down, in one presentation, maybe with the different roles. Okay, this applies to you, this applies to you. I found that's a pretty easy way to get this role-based training, at least to some degree, for these smaller companies, because I think a lot of times that it's, people think of it like a barrier to entry, and it's more content we have to go over, it's more time we have to cut out. But I don't think that necessarily has to be that way, right? If you structure it the way like Matthew brought up, that's a way to do it. And yeah, there may be some parts where, whatever, the sales staff, it's like, okay, well, this doesn't apply to me. Might still be good to, to hear, it's, you're not losing anything by sitting in on the meeting. But I think we're just seeing what's, a surprisingly gradual evolution of security awareness training, where, I know all of us, want to see it a certain way, and got to be more patient than I would have hoped. You would have thought as risks have gone up, and as more and more people are ingrained with the technology and business is globalized, that we'd see this shift. But I think there are just a lot of these smaller companies where that's not even in their it's not top of mind. And hopefully, like we've said, there doesn't have to be, a breach or an incident to make that all of a sudden, become important. Better to prepare than to react.
Yeah, Elizabeth made a really good point, almost in the same area, to talk about how at a company with less than 50 people, they had a pretty clear incident that showed that they really needed some specific role-based security training. I wonder if Elizabeth would want to make a comment on that. Maybe just, Elizabeth, do you want to put in the chat if you're comfortable coming on to make a comment, that we can hear you, if she's available.
And I think, as we brought up, some of those instructor-led live sessions, with Elizabher's comment right there, that's great insight that you might, not otherwise get if you, just have this top down, type training. When you get to hear that, that's those are the insights that really make a difference, I think.
Great. So Elizabeth, you're on. What would you like to add to your comment about the breach that you had?
There really wasn't a breach in our company, but because we were affected by companies that were sending us things that had ransomware attacks, and their whole systems were down, they couldn't take our order, they couldn't process things. Our plant manager made it really clear, look, here's some things that we need to make sure that we're taking care of on our end, so this doesn't happen to any of our clients. We had redundancies in place so that we were still able to get the things that we needed, because they were aware that this could happen and had made provision for it. Even in a small company like that, we had, just a few people working on any given day, but they rotated them around. They had, every single person knew who's allowed in the building, who's not allowed in the building, where are they allowed. It was very simple, but it made it clear to us, this can happen, and it affected us a lot. So let's be really aware that these are important things to know.
Excellent. Yeah, really good insights just to hear from a real incident, real stories, even if it wasn't your company. Glad it wasn't your company. But Fleetus, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I'll keep it brief, but I think a lot of them probably have received role-based training, just probably haven't been aware of it. So if you think about it, today's society, we all have all hands, we probably have staff meetings, and we've probably had guest speakers come in. Depending on your organization, you may have had targeted comms given to you by that speaker or by those leaders inside of your org. It may have came from a C-level who gave it to you in one of their talks. It may have come from a guest speaker you brought in. I have a friend of mine on the call who would be aware of this, having cyber moments inside of certain meetings and bringing in a cyber representative or security representation in a lot of your meetings is imperative. So if you can train your security champions that we talk to do that, you can get role-based training the same way that we talked about. So like when you have your onboarding activity, you give the sales team certain things because they're dealing with customer information. Or if it's your IT firm, you give them certain things because they have domain admin. If it's your marketing team, they get certain tips and tricks, fact sheets that you can give them. It may not be auditable. There may not be a measure or a metric behind it, but they are receiving role-based training because of their onboarding in their LMS, their learning management system, from their managers, from the HR people teams. So it's probably happening. Yes, we can structure it better, but it doesn't have to be formal for those under 50 to under 100 employees. As your organization gets larger, you can have an instructional training, you can have an LMS, a learning management system that you subscribe to your employees as a manager. You have to take this training as part of your annual or part of your goals and objectives for the year.
Absolutely. That's great. So lots of insights. Something I want to just hint at is towards the end, we're going to try and summarize the insights for executives, for implementation managers, and for individuals. So based on this discussion, I'm going to ask people to kind of recollect, what were the most important discussions around the poll that we just did to help executives, managers, and individuals when we get there. So I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to go back to the deck and just look at a little bit at some of the things that were
Scott, before you move
discussed.
on, Michael
Yeah.
has
Michael has a question. Sure.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of add to maybe the slight right-hand turn that we took. And I think this might be an apropos moment based on what your next slide is going to be. Even if you don't have or you're not under one of the compliance regimes that are currently out there, many insurance companies require you to carry some type of cyber insurance rider, and that rider also includes that your staff must be trained. So again, that's why it's a little shocking to me that we have so many people that aren't being trained, because if something does happen to that organization, even if they're not under a compliance rider, if their insurance company asks for records of role-based training or annual cybersecurity training, and you can't provide them, then your claim will be denied. So, I mean, that is something to keep in mind, even for organizations that aren't under a compliance regime at all.
Yeah, good point, Michael. Have you seen anybody who's actually been denied insurance to this point?
I've worked with several organizations, small to medium, with less than 10 employees or less than 500 employees that got hit with one attack or another. They were asked directly if their people were trained as per their insurance policy. They could not provide those records, and the insurance company denied their claim. To date, I would say over the companies I've worked with in the last 5 years or so, I can probably count 7 that's happened to.
Wow. That's really interesting. It actually reminds me, we did an entire forum session on insurance, cyber insurance, several months ago. And I think that was one of the most important things that came out. And it might have been Tyler who mentioned, I can't remember, but the idea that you have to be honest on your insurance applications about what you're actually able to do or what your practices are. And if you are stretching the truth or not able to prove the things you're doing, you might still be able to get the application approved in order to get the coverage. But if you do make a claim, like you said, Michael, that can actually be denied if you're not following what you said you were doing. And in some cases, it's better to just admit, yeah, we don't do this. And they might not deny it. They might adjust your premium, but it's important really to be truthful with the insurance companies. All right. I think just in the interest of moving on, I'm happy to keep on the discussion if people really want to dig deeper on some of this stuff. But I did want to sort of highlight some of the things that I think Michael mentioned around the need for role-based security training in some of these compliance regimes. I know you mentioned CMMC, but there's also NIST 800-53, which a lot of people in government and military would recognize. I just put a QR code here so you can actually get to, there's a spreadsheet that has all of the, 900 controls or however many there are. And in there, I think there are 17 of them that are around awareness and training. And there are 5 or 6, I think, on role-based security training. And so if you're in an area that is governed by that kind of compliance process, you actually are probably being required to have a role-based training in your organization. And if you're not, then I think what happens most often is functional managers see either some common risks within a particular group where it's, maybe it's IT administrators who have privileges and they're just randomly giving account permissions, not based on any criteria. You need to get those guys under control and train them how to do it properly. Or there might be actually groups of people within an organization that have limitations on how they can be taught. So, if they're drivers or people who don't have access to devices that where you would normally take the training, you might have to do live training for these people, and it might have to be role-based in that sense, and it would particularly likely cover different risks related to that particular group as well. And I just wanted to show, this is in the NIST control catalog. I brought out just the one description around the top level role-based security training. It just says, provide role-based security and privacy training to personnel with the following roles and responsibilities. Now, this wording here is for each organization to tailor their content so they can define their own roles and responsibilities that need special training. But this should be done before authorizing people to access systems with sensitive information on them, and whenever system changes make that a requirement. So just wanted to give people a flavor of what that wording looks like in a compliance type environment where you might have to do role-based security training. Any comments on this kind of guidance from NIST? Fleetus?
I was going to say, like, it's pretty straightforward until it's not. And when I say until it's not is when people aren't able to define the roles inside their organization. So for a smaller organization, which we talked about, who may have someone who's a developer for part of the day, they're sysadmin for the rest of the day, and then they're a BA for the other part of the day. This gets very tricky when you have compliance-based standards to align them with. So you have to align it based on the title that you give them. So what I've challenged organizations that I've consulted with and worked with is make sure that you're giving a title or a role that you can audit, that you can assign to Michael's point earlier and Matthew's as well, that when it comes time to do RBEC, you can tell them what their role actually is. Because we have a lot of people who are jack of all trades, but when it comes to training and compliance, you have to be able to define what their role is so that you can actually give them a checkbox to check that you can legitimately stand behind as audited and approved.
Is that something that you would see being done through an HR process or HR system where you've got everybody in the organization has been assigned a role of some kind?
Yeah, so it can be in your HR systems. It could be in your IDPs who determine what roles you're in. So give you role-based access when you're SSO or SAML or SCIM.
What does IDP mean?
So identity provider.
Okay.
SSO is single sign-on. SCIM is your integrations with to allow you to get the proper role once you log in to give you admin, read, write, etc. So my
Excellent.
apologies for the acronym /
No worries. Matthew, any comment?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually had to go through a lot of the NIST 853 controls over my years. But I find that they're very thorough, and that's one of the things that I like about it, because when you're using that to assess any organization, you really find out what's going on with it and then be able to show the output. But I've seen training departments give it, I've developed it, then handed it off after full training. There's so many different approaches you can take to this. As long as it's being tracked and you go through and assess it and make sure that it's validated, usually you're pretty good. I usually trust but verify is kind of how I see a small part of security. So yeah, I think those compliance-based controls are right. But still, what I have done, it has worked even in the NIST 853 arena, is what I would describe before. Let's put, hey, this applies to this group, this applies to this group. And so you are getting role-based training without having to create everything individuated. So sometimes it's just so much easier. And do you have the people power to really give the training the way everybody wants? Because you don't want to, if you're short-staffed, create a lot of extra work for people when it really is not applicable. And especially if people are going to comply anyway for things that that are not relevant to them, you don't have an issue. And then if they are dealing with cross-functional work, you don't have to worry about that either. You cover yourself from a compliance perspective, and you also cover yourself from just a sheer training perspective. And I like to add in things like, the role-based controls and things like that into it to make sure that you're covering your bases all across the board from a legal standpoint. Security awareness training is but one aspect of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to ask if Elizabeth or Brandy are still on, if you want to make any comments so far on what we've talked about. Okay.
You guys sound great. I'm listening. I'm learning.
All right, that's cool. And Elizabeth, just chime in if you want to. But Tyler, you can give your thoughts too.
Yeah, I think especially the compliance standards like the NIST standard, I think it serves as a good, pretty thorough litmus test for an organization, to help evaluate where you're at. And of course, I think there's two sides to, also getting a little bit more specific with your organization in terms of just a risk-based, sort of security awareness. But I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. And I don't think anybody that's, doing this, thinks that they're mutually exclusive. And obviously, go back to Matthew's point, to kind of balance. And I know with our poll question with, when we think this sort of training, in terms of organizational size should be put in place. I know this kind of is our next question here. I think it's, the finding ways to best implement it, for each given, organizational size. Because like we've talked about earlier, with some of these smaller organizations, you do have, I think Fleeta's brought this up, a lot of people that are sort of jack of all trades. You got a 25-person organization, depending on what you do, there's a lot of cross-functional duties that someone might have. So, there's still role-based security training. It's just for them, it might be a little bit more broad because the roles, as you get to, 500, 1,000, these larger organizations, they tend to have much more defined titles and roles to where it's much more cut and dry. But I think if it's at all possible, the more specific you get, the more use I think people, have, for it.
Yeah. And I think that's one reason why the, insurance companies, for example, or other regimes don't actually dictate exactly what kinds of roles or how you define your roles. It's the fact that you have, and you should really be doing that from a risk point of view, right?
Yeah, you can argue that roles can be as simple as a regular user and a power user. And you give power users different training than you give your daily driver.
Yeah.
You could almost argue, even with NIST, that if I don't have domain rights or admin rights, my training is slightly different than if I have the ability to start making changes to systems or deleting data. That's where the role-based training comes into play, is what actions can you take with that account? And it's account driven. Sometimes it's not just the person. This account can do this. This account cannot. So just to divvy a little bit, it can be driven by the account you have access to, from a service account, process account, or if it's your admin power user account.
Yeah. Michael, did we get your input on this?
Well, I think primarily, yeah. I mean, I've specialized specifically in the NIST risk management framework for the last 10 years, and implementing it in both small and Fortune 500 companies. And it is. I will fully admit it is very daunting to organizations at first, because they look at this. I had one enterprising young student in a class a few years ago that actually counted all the pages of the special publications that they needed to understand, and it equaled to be more than War and Peace. So, I said, well, that my first response was, well, that's why you pay people like me to read that stuff, so I can give you the Reader's Digest version of it. But yeah, I mean, NIST is quickly becoming the kind of universal standard right now. Even if you don't have to comply with NIST requirements as an organization, just implementing some of the practices that are there, regardless of the size of your organization, it's well worth the environment that you're trying to build, right? And the first thing I tell organizations when I go in and consult for them, because they all want to ask me the same question. I don't know if they all have the same book they ordered from Amazon or something or whatever, but they always ask, well, what do you think good security is? And my answer is universally the same, right? I can always tell an organization that it has applied good security and good security practices, because security is invisible. People just act and react the way that they need to in a secure environment. Now, understanding, I came from a DoD space and an intel space where life is very regimented when it comes to security. So applying that to the corporate environment, no, I would not encourage anyone to do that.
But that said, Michael, I think that's a great, I'm going to flag this for our transcript to say this is a great executive insight that you just said about how a company with great security, the security is invisible. So we're going to pull that one out.
Take it, use it. I haven't copyrighted it, so you can have it.
All right. If nobody has any urgent comments or questions, I'm going to move on. We kind of have beaten this one to death, I think. At what point and by what criteria does it make sense to create role-based security training? So with that, I'm going to take a moment. I didn't really spend any time introducing myself for people who haven't been on the forums before. I am the CEO of ClickArmor, Scott Wright, and I've been doing security awareness training for about 15 years. I actually am an engineer. I started doing security architectures and policies and risk assessments 20 years ago. And I realized very quickly that humans are going to be the targets after a while, once we make all the technology great, and it already was getting pretty good. And having taught security awareness for 10 years, at some point I realized it's a different kind of training that's needed than task-based or product-based training. So we have to get people, who are inclined to try and disengage from your training to be more engaged. And so we actually built ClickArmor on a game engine, Unity 3D. So it's what most, very popular video games are based on, but it's not a game. It's a learning management system that actually allows you to do courses and very quickly and flexibly create and change courses. So we actually have a course catalog that has things like security for IT staff, security for project managers, for business application owners. And so these are things that I think fit really well into the whole topic of role-based security training. So if you're interested in learning more about how we do this, love to chat with you and just reach out. So that's my little plug for ClickArmor. Let's move on to our second question for the panel. How do you determine the proper segmentation of roles? We also kind of discovered or discussed this a little bit, but is there anything, sort of practical that we can give to people, for example, management or IT security managers who are trying to implement this kind of stuff, and they're not giving much guidance maybe from their executives? How would you recommend people start in terms of segmenting for role-based security training? I'm going to ask if Brandy or Elizabeth have any comments. If not, I'm going to turn it over to Matthew. So go ahead, Matthew, and we'll wait for any hands up from Brandy or Elizabeth.
Sure. So from my experience, it always depends, but I'll give you some factors that might come into it. So for example, I've worked with physical security people, and I can tell you, if you're really protecting that, they have a whole new set of requirements that may not be applicable to standard organizations. And those can be quite daunting as well. Having been in the federal space, I can tell you that the requirements are pretty strong when you're looking at things from that standpoint. So I kind of do balance it out. I do like to have IT a little bit separate because there are a lot of additional requirements that can go into it depending on the organization. I take a look at the compliance framework. I've worked with a lot of frameworks over the years, from SOC 2, ISO, et cetera, HITRUST. I mean, the list goes on. But sometimes you're going to say, hey, by the way, are you collecting sensitive information? And then what are you doing with that information? If you're dealing with a PCI zone, you're supposed to have everything encrypted or tokenized in a best case. Do you want people putting things down on a notepad? Well, you probably have to tell them, hey, what are the key things that you need to pay attention to? I also kind of take a look at who's going to be handling what information as well. Like like before I started, I usually like to work with, hey, what are the privacy departments? What are the legal concerns? And try to bring in everybody to say, hey, what are the concerns from your standpoint before creating it? And I kind of, after listening and kind of mulching through some of that information and understanding, I kind of start to put together an idea of what's appropriate for the organization. As I said, though, in some organizations, I have taken that multiple set of requirements and just put everything under one bucket because I don't have the resources to do everything properly. I would like to automate, as much as possible, but I can tell you from a lot of people I know, what do they do with training? If they're doing it, they shove it off to the side somewhere and they don't care about it. They maybe turn off the volume as the security training goes on in the background.
Yeah.
So, and some of them have just been through it so much, but then if they do that, but they can still answer questions, if you're using questions to validate that training, I'm okay with it. Again, when it comes to segmentation, it's all about the business needs, and you really have to take a look at the compliance. You have to take a look at the roles, et cetera, and then start to move from there.
Awesome. Brandy, you had a comment. Are you still able
Yeah,
to unmute?
it'll be quick. It kind of, I had to think it through. I didn't want to say just anything, but I was thinking that when we go to segment roles, that we should do it based on something that either the SOC is comfortable with, or roles that they already have in place, or roles that they have in the cloud that are already in place, and try to tailor our solution to what they already have, because people feel when they feel more comfortable, it's easier to work with them than to introduce our own segmentation or how we believe that they should segment their roles. We should just work with what they have and then tailor it to them.
Yeah.
And
Is
that
there anything
requires
scarier than somebody getting an invitation to say, you have to take this training for this role, and they didn't even know they were in that role, right?
Yeah, so yeah, I think any solution, as long as the client is comfortable, if we can possibly tailor it to them, that's wonderful, because then they're already comfortable. I wanted to say one thing about the comfort thing. My professor was like, how do you get people to do a multi-factor? Like, inside the company, we know multi-factor is important, but how about you have clients out there and you say to them, hey, we need you to enroll in Duo because it's more secure for you. And people are like, what is Duo? Or what
Yeah.
is Ping ID? Or what is this? So, but what they're comfortable with is their phones. So, okay, we'll do the multi-factor through the SMS. And then they say, oh, that's not secure enough. But then my professor said, look, something is better than nothing.
Something is
If
better
this
than
is what
nothing. Yeah.
people are comfortable with, we need to start with this. If sending a code to their cell phone is comfortable for people, then we need to do that. And then once they get comfortable in that situation, then we can up the ante and say, hey, we have this new product. Cisco is offering Duo or Okta or whatever later. But the thing is that we have to understand that we have to guide people into it a little bit slower than how we would like. And I think that's the problem, is that we want to rush it. We want to say, hey, we need to do this. We need to do it right now. But that is not how people work. So
yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, the comfort level, that's another insight I'm going to take away for us to distill into our reporting afterwards, to say, it really is important that people are comfortable with whatever training you're putting out there, because it's going to make a huge difference, not only in their engagement, but in their ability to understand and work more securely. So thanks for that, Brandy. I think Michael had to drop off, but Fleetus or Tyler?
Well, I'll go real quick because I do have a hard stop at 2, but I'm going to go ahead and do it for a soundbite for our individuals. I agree with you, Brandy. You got to get to where the user, the peer of yours, so I'm going to use peer, is asking the right questions. So like, as we get that culture that Michael said earlier, if I build a security culture, you're going to have questions, but I'm going to let you have those in no blame or blameless meetings, where you can come in with a blameless conversation. So as the individual, go to your security team and say, hey, I just want to share this with you. I clicked this. I have a question about this. I'm not comfortable with this, because we as users, and I'm going to put myself as a user, we can do shadow security. And what I mean by shadow security is we can think we're being secure, but we're actually hindering our IT and our security organizations, because we're turning on settings that our security team doesn't want us to turn on. We're zipping and encrypting our files before we send them or upload them, which could be breaking the backup and restore process. So as a user, talk to your security team. For your security awareness manager, next soundbite, go interview your customer, go interview your peers, go interview your teams and ask them, what are your pain points? Do you know what your role is? How can I help you with the training so that I can get the comms team to give training, or I can give you training, or we can get the other departments to give you training? So.
Yeah. Tyler,
You said the magic words, Fleetus, security culture. That's what it's all about. That's the transcendent good we're all reaching for. Because, like you said, once you get people asking questions, as long as you don't, disincentivize that, which the way to disincentivize that is to go, what did you do, and then penalize them for it. I think in my experience, you do get people more engaged when you really, drill down, like, okay, tell me what you're dealing with personally, and then when you build up that rapport, right? And sometimes I think it might be hard, especially coming in as like a consultant or someone on the outside. I think it might sometimes be easier for internal staff, just because there might be more rapport there, but that's neither here nor there. But once you get their input and you get, really what is, to me, buy-in, once they buy into the security, where it's like, okay, and I know we brought this up ad nauseum in the past about, the person is the weakest element. That's, even if it's true, you want to say it's true, that's not you don't want to make people feel defenseless or stupid or like they can't do anything. I think, in drilling down, assessing and getting those individual, the role specifications, you're able to up that buy-in and make people feel like they actually, have a part to play, and because it is something that's important. And I think people widely, recognize it's important. They just need to realize that it's important for them. Like, they have an active hand to play. And it may be silly stuff that, some of us may know, as common sense, but a lot of people don't. And that's not a negative. It just means they need to be brought up to speed and, meet people where they're at. But yeah, I think it's all about security culture, because once you get that, that's the intangible. You can't pay for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have touched on it many times, and it just is one of those core principles that we have to keep repeating. So last question that we're going to bring up is, how do you determine performance and assessment criteria for role-based security training? Are you going to assess people in those role-based training sessions, or is it possible? I'll leave it open to anybody who wants to answer.
I think this goes quickly back to performance and assessment criteria. It would be defining early on, as I said earlier, how granular are you going to make those RBAC, those role-based trainings? Are you going to say it's for every user in your company? For example, I worked with a regulated utility. We didn't give certain individuals internet access or email access because they didn't need to receive external email. They didn't need to go to the internet to do their job. Yes, that is a tight role that we made, but their training is slightly different. If they can't go to the web, I don't need to give them web-based, like web surfing training for their job. That's imperative. The finance team need to understand or the accounting team need to understand how to see a supply chain or a BEC, a business email compromise. So that's how you do is you give them their trainings, and then we go back to the compliance. They either sign off, their manager signs off, and you can audit. I've got 70% completion, 80% completion, and then you apply it. You give them an opportunity to share their knowledge. Share an example with me. Give me a spotlight. Give me the ability to share how you've applied what we talked about. This goes to that first name basis. I can call up Sue. Hey, Sue, tell me how you applied this year's training or how you applied this topic in your day-to-day life. And then you put it in a newsletter, you put it on your portal, and now you're giving attestation and you're giving recognition.
Absolutely. I know you got to go in a minute, Fleetus. So I'm going to give you a last comment. Any other insights?
Last comment would be get on a first name basis. I like that comment from Tyler. Like, get to know your employees, and the employees get to know your security awareness people, get to know your leadership, get to know anyone in the org, so that you can have that conversation. If you can send them a DM, an IM, an email, and know that it's going to be read and it's going to be received and from your leadership, be willing to take 5 minutes out of your time to respond to that DM, that email, or that phone call, and just say, hey, I may not have time now, but can we schedule time? Or give them a quick kudos or thank you for that, and have someone else down the line respond back to them with a more detailed answer. And then for your security awareness folks, partner with your legal team, your privacy teams, to learn what you should be doing from that NIST, ISO, SOC 2, GDPR, whatever framework you're complying with, so that your users understand how to handle their data, how to share their information, and then how to report anything that goes awry in their day-to-day jobs.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Fleetus. Any other comments on a performance assessment or criteria for assessment?
I mean, I think we did a pretty good job discussing it here. I mean, you could,
Mhm.
as you said, here are their criteria, assess them on it, have a questionnaire. I've done this before electronically. I haven't done that in person, but
Yeah.
you could give a, quiz in person and send it out and have them, put stuff out manually. But that gets to be a very painful process. That's why I like the online. But yeah, I've gone through and done that. But also, even for those I mentioned on the webinar chat, there are 5-minute trainings that you can give once a month. And then if you just have a couple of questions and have them answer a couple of things, are they learning something? And you just have something quick, it's good feedback. Did they actually absorb the material or not? And sometimes when you get into some weeds that you wouldn't normally get to within security awareness training, that's a great place to go ahead and cover some of those things. So yeah, there's a lot of different approaches you can take with this.
I think that's true. One thing that I've heard too is from different CIOs, for example, some of them are more concerned with just having the touch points and having top of mind, security top of mind in people in certain roles. And for that, in ClickArmor, what we have are 3-minute challenges, we call them weekly 3-minute challenges. So we send that out, and it's really not so much, did they get them right or not? It's just having them exercise the skills around spotting phishing messages or that are tailored to their role and things like that. So those are the kinds of things that we're seeing as well. So I'm just going to try and respect people's time. We did say this was going to end at 2, so I'm just going to wrap things up. As I said, we like to bring out, the insights for executives, the insights for implementers, and the insights for individuals. So if you guys have any particular thoughts in any of these areas that you think we covered something really important today, just type it in the chat. Was it something around, how we plan or how we deploy things, or just some tips for people? So really love to hear your comments on those. Next, just want to make a quick plug for ClickArmor has a $99 promotion right now for Security Awareness Month. If you were with us a few weeks ago, we did a session, an hour on preparing for Security Awareness Month, which is in October, but now is the time to start getting ready for that. So if you use this QR code, you can go there and sign up for $99. You get 4 special 3-minute challenges that can be deployed during Security Awareness Month, or anytime actually, but it's especially useful just to get that foot in the door for a small organization or somebody who wants to try doing gamification. And just to wrap up, our next session is going to be July 26th. So we're going to try and stick to 2 weeks apart, try and keep this time slot. Maybe you can just put this in your calendar or repeat it every 2 weeks, 1 p.m. Eastern every other Wednesday. But the next session, we're going to try and make it a little bit different, a little less structured. It'll be more around timely news stories and anecdotes for security awareness. So try and think about things that you've seen in the news, preferably in the last quarter. But if you have a story that's a favorite that works really, really well, doesn't matter when it came out, we'd love to hear it. So we'll hear a lot of stories shared that are really good for educating people in security awareness. And you should be able to sign up using this QR code just to get your spot in that panel discussion. So with that, it's a little over an hour, so I'm just going to wrap things up. And I want to thank everybody on the panel, Tyler, Fleetus, Michael, Matthew, Brandy, Elizabeth, who joined us as well. So thanks, everybody. Really appreciate you all staying on for the entire time. And I would love to get your feedback on these sessions. You can always reach out to me. My email is swright@clickarmor.ca. And if you have ideas or things that we can do better or new topics, I would love to hear from you. So for now, thanks very much, everybody, and keep working securely. We'll talk to you later.